Okay, let's bring in the public safety MPs. You know them, of course. Candice Bergen is Parliamentary Secretary on that issue for the Conservatives. Randall Garrison is, of course, that one with the NDP, and Francis Scarpaleggia is with the Liberals. Welcome to you all. Every time the U.S. has a big security problem, security always tightens up on our side of the border. It seems like, every time there's an incident, we have to sacrifice a little bit more in the name of public security. Do you think, Candice, that that's going to happen in this case as more and more stuff happens? We get poisoned letters being sent to the White House. We got a bomb threat now in the courthouse where the briefing was supposed to happen on the latest developments. Is this going to come across the border in some ways, do you think?
I mean, the United States is our closest ally and closest friend, certainly in terms of economic trade, but logistically, literally, we are neighbors. They're very important to us in so many ways, as we are to them. I think what we want to see, first of all, is the safety and security of Canadians. That's why our officials have maintained and are continuing with a higher degree of vigilance, especially at certain crossings and making sure that points of entry are guarded to a higher degree, as well as working together with our American counterparts for a number of reasons. Again, the first priority is the safety and security of Canadians, but also because we want to support our American friends in this effort. So I don't see it probably in that light. I see it as working together for the good of both countries.
I thought we were heading to an era where the border, the southern border, kind of gets softened and we do continental perimeter.
It won't change our beyond the border. It doesn't change our beyond the border agreement.
Will anything change in our lives as a result?
Well, I guess what the Boston Marathon indicates, with more than 2,000 Canadians there, is both the interconnections of our trade and our society as a whole. So there were many people from all walks of life in Canada who were down there in Boston and who were part of those very tragic events. So I think we are inextricably linked, and I do believe the government has done the right thing in this case, is to take precautions but not to panic, and to make sure that everybody does what's necessary without really letting the people who use terror win by changing what we're doing every day.
Francis, before I get your thoughts on that, I do want to ask you something about what happened today. Justin Trudeau, let's run a clip from him. He was responding to this attack, and here's what he had to say.
Days ago, there was a horrific tragedy. I expressed clearly both today and yesterday the shock that I can only imagine that father feels that his son was killed for wanting to give him a hug. I really hope that Mr. Harper rethinks the extents and the lengths he's willing to go to personally attack people and to politicize tragedies like that.
When you see this type of action, when you see this type of violent act, you do not sit around trying to rationalize it or make excuses for it or figure out its root causes. You condemn it categorically, and to the extent you can deal with the perpetrators, you deal with them as harshly as possible. And that's what this government would do if it were ever faced with such actions.
Okay, Francis, so the Prime Minister thinks your new leader is a little too soft in his response. What's your response to that?
Well, I think terrorism is an evil, and I think everyone in the House of Commons recognizes that, and I think all Canadians recognize that. I don't understand where the difference lies in terms of perceptions of terrorism and perceptions of evil in our society, and so I don't really know where the Prime Minister is coming from on that.
I mean, actually, I would hope maybe Francis would clarify what his leader meant. There is no excuse. There is no rationalization. There is no explaining this away. When you have this kind of horrific cowardice act, there's no saying, well, this is just a person who maybe felt that they were excluded from society. Now, maybe this isn't what Mr. Trudeau meant. Maybe his intentions, Mr. Trudeau's intentions, were good, and that wasn't what he meant to say. But I think that what we want to hear him say, or maybe clarify, did he mean to provide an excuse for this terrible act and the person who committed it, or does he condemn it? And would he agree with us as Conservatives? There is no excuse, there is no reason, there is no rationalization for that kind of act.
Just hold on, are we going to the President now? Not yet? Okay. Okay, Randall.
Well, I guess I was mystified by Mr. Trudeau's comments. Maybe not take quite as hard a line as Candice has done, but as somebody who's worked in conflict zones, in the end, even when you know the specifics of a case, I don't think you can really ever understand what would motivate people to do these kinds of horrific things to ordinary citizens, to children. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And when Mr. Trudeau says that he's somehow a victim here when he doesn't like the response to his comments, I find a bit unusual, because when you're in public life, you have a responsibility to make public commentary and then to either stand by or retract your statements.
If he didn't mean that, he should say it. But I agree. He needs to clarify what he meant. Was this an excusable act because this person felt excluded from society?
Right.
Or does he condemn it? He needs to let Canadians know.
You don't sound, you didn't hear this, Francis?
Right.
Again, I don't
it.
quite understand the controversy here. I mean, of course, everyone condemns this act. It's obvious that everyone condemns
Justin didn't
this act, and you know, I just don't think you know, we should be trying to derive you know, political benefit or partisan political benefit out of a tragedy, and that I think is lamentable and a little bit disturbing, quite frankly. I think what Justin was saying, if you're referring to an interview...
Well, yesterday he had talked about, let's get to the root causes of this. And
no, I think he was saying was that it's very important to have a society that's united to combat terrorism. And in fact, the authorities always tell us whenever there's a terrorist act that if anyone knows anything about the act, that they should come forth. Now, in a society that is united, people are going to speak to each other. They will come forward with information and so on. In a society that's divided, you know, you might see people who are reticent to come forward. And I think really that's all he's getting at. And to try and make this into...
I'm sorry, but that's kind of, that's weak. And I guess I would give him the benefit of the doubt. I actually wanted to give Justin Trudeau the benefit of the doubt that that wasn't what he meant to say. And I know this was one of his first national interviews, and it was maybe a new experience. I would hope that he would have said, that was not what I meant. I absolutely condemn these acts. There is no excuse. If an individual feels excluded from society, there are other ways that they can express that, talk about that. Killing innocent people. We have 13 people at a minimum that have amputations. People have died. Families have been destroyed. And as the Prime Minister said, this government absolutely, and any good leader, I mean, Randall, and again, we have many disagreements on policy,
yes, you do.
but we do agree. You condemn this categorically, and this was Justin Trudeau's chance to do that. He didn't do it, and Francis, to his credit, is trying to explain it, but I think even for Francis, it's a bit of a stretch.
It seems he should have just come out and said, bad.
Bad.
You know,
it's
instead
bad.
of talking about, well, you talked about, you know, we don't emphasize a culture of fear and mistrust and stuff, but we should emphasize a culture of something.
This was horrific. This was totally cowardly. There was.
I hear attack ads being formulated
I think if you look at Justin's comments today when he talked about the human side of this tragedy, where a young boy was killed, you know, for running to hug. I mean, I think it's quite obvious how he feels about the tragedy, and I think we should really be careful about trying to politicize it.
Okay. Any aftershocks on this? You see legislatively coming forward, Candice? Do you see, does this government have to take any further steps, or do you feel what we have in place is sufficient? We just hope that
well, we currently have legislation that we're moving through. For example, S7 is a bill that gives greater powers and greater ability for the authorities to stop, for example, people, and we don't know what this attack was from, but in terms of terrorist attacks, for example, and again, we don't know the origins of the one in Boston, but certainly we are moving to strengthen the ability for law enforcement to stop young people or people from going abroad to engage or be trained in terrorism activity. The opposition haven't quite indicated if they're going to support that.
We are supporting it, as you know. We're supporting it. The NDP is not supporting it.
So we are moving forward on to keep Canadians safe and secure.
More live events breaking into our show.
Important.
Okay, we're going to go to Washington, where President Barack Obama is responding to a defeat in the Senate of a gun control amendment. Here's what he's having to say.